Hello, everyone, and welcome to the National Skillshare series on addressing and preventing gender-based violence at post-secondary institutions in Canada. My name is CJ Rowe, and I'm a co-director of the Courage to Act project. We are thrilled to welcome you to the Skillshare session today with the Engaging Men on Campus community of practice. Before we begin, a quick note on language and accessibility. Attendees can turn on or off captioning in Zoom as needed by clicking closed caption in the control bar at the bottom of your screen. You can also listen to the session in French by selecting the French language channel using the interpretation menu. Today's session is being recorded and will be available on our website along with a transcript of today's session. A graphic recording will also be created from today's presentation by Karina from Drawing Change. Their role is to listen deeply and translate our ideas into visuals. You can watch Karina drawing as she follows along with the session. There will be a graphic recording available for all Skillshare sessions, which you can find on the Education tab of our website, and when they are released as part of the Community of Practice tools via the Courage to Act Knowledge Center. The Courage to Act is a 2-year national initiative to address and prevent gender-based violence on post-secondary campuses in Canada. It builds on the key recommendation within Possibility Seed's report, Courage to Act, developing a national framework to address and prevent gender-based violence on post-secondary institutions. Our project is the first national collaborative of its kind to bring together scholars, experts, and advocates from across Canada to end gender-based violence on campus. A key feature of our project is a national Skillshare series where our working groups, communities of practices, and keynote speakers will discuss tools, trends, and strategies that will shape how we address and prevent gender-based violence on campus. Throughout the Skillshare series, we are thrilled to introduce and offer insights into the development of the tools and resources created by gender-based violence experts across the country, which will officially be launched in August 2021, so stay tuned. There will be a chance to sign up for piloting opportunities through the Courage to Act Knowledge Center in the fall. Attendees will join a connected network of experts and advocates across Canada who are exploring urgent issues and promising practices. Supported by Caucus, these Skillshare sessions are also recognized learning opportunities. Attendance at 10 or more live webinars and our National Skillshare series sessions will count towards an online certificate. Our project is made possible through the generous support and funding by the Department of Women and Gender Equality within the federal government of Canada. We begin today's session by acknowledging that this work is taking place on and across the traditional territories of many Indigenous nations. We recognize that gender-based violence is just one form of violence caused by colonization to marginalize and dispossess Indigenous peoples from their lands and their waters. Our project strives to honor this truth as we move towards decolonizing this work and actualizing justice for missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls across the country. I also want to acknowledge that this work can be challenging. Many of us may have our own experiences of survivorship and of supporting those we love and care about who have experienced gender-based violence. This is a gentle reminder here to be attentive to our own wellness as we engage in these difficult conversations. You can visit the self-care section of our Skillshare webpage or visit our shelf care room by visiting the link in the chat. You can follow along on Twitter with the hashtag GBV National Skillshare. You are invited to enter questions into the Q&A box throughout the session, and they will be posed to the presenters at the end of the presentation. We will try to engage with as many questions as we can in the time that we have together. Members of the Engaging Men on Campus community of practice will also be monitoring the chat. At the end of this hour, You will find a link to the evaluation form. We'd be grateful if you could take a few minutes to share your feedback, as it helps us improve. This is anonymous. And following the session, you will also get a copy of the evaluation and a link to the recording. So with that, housekeeping come to a close. I'm excited to introduce to you Ian Deguerre and Daniel Brisbois from the Engaging Men on Campus Community of Practice. Ian is a social worker and a contract teacher in the faculty with both Mohawk College and Wilfrid Laurier University. Daniel is the residence life manager at the University of Guelph. And I'm pleased to turn this over to both Daniel and Ian to take the reins and move us forward in our session today.
Awesome, thank you for that, CJ. Just going to share my screen here. Awesome. Thank you everyone for joining us today. My name's Daniel and I will be joined by Ian today. We're going to be walking you through our presentation. So exploring the pathways for engagement framework for engaging men on campus. First of all, I'd like to say a big thank you to everyone for joining us here today. I know that your time is super valuable and it's really amazing to see so many people coming to this presentation to engage in some of the work that we've been doing over the last year or so. So I really appreciate your time and hope that this is a valuable learning opportunity for everyone involved. And we're hoping that Ian and I can get some good conversations going. So please do feel free to put any questions that you have throughout the presentation in the Q&A function, and we'll have some time towards the end of our presentation to get to all of the questions that you folks have asked throughout the session. So for today's presentation, this is our agenda for today. So we're going to do a little bit of an introduction to the project that we embarked on around a year ago. We're going to have an introduction to our project team, as well as myself and Ian. We're going to do a detailed overview of the project and some of the steps that we took in order to go from starting to where we are today to share our toolkit with everyone. We're going to give an introduction to the framework that you folks will be able to see come August, and then answer any questions that you might have about some of the content that we've presented today as well. So to introduce our team, so over the last maybe 14 months, this group of 6 people have all been working together to come together and create the framework for engaging men on campus. So to introduce everyone a little bit, if you look at kind of the graphic over here to the left, on the top left-hand corner, we have Leah. Leah is the Associate Director of Conflict and Investigations. Right next to Leah is myself there in the middle. So I'm Dan Brisbois and I'm a residence life manager. Beside me is Ian. Ian is a contract faculty member at both Mohawk College and Wilfrid Laurier, as mentioned before. On the bottom left-hand corner, we have Lisa. Lisa is a consultant and educator in our communities. Next to Lisa is Sharon. Sharon works at RMC in the Success Center as the director. And next to Sharon is Eric. Eric is a community development librarian. And over the last year or so, we've all been working together to put together this framework for all of you folks to hopefully engage men more meaningfully on campus and help build out some good programming on all of our institutions. Along with our team, we also wanted to give a special thanks to Ainsley, Aspen, and David. They were early contributors in our project, so just wanted to give them the recognition that they deserve for all of the work that they had also done to help get our project started. So throughout the next hour, Ian and myself will be going through some of the content that we've prepared for you today. And some of the other folks who are shown in the picture there will also be working behind the scenes. So we have people monitoring our chat as well as the Q&A functions. So they'll be kind of helping push questions forward to both Ian and myself, And they'll also be dropping in resources and things like that in the chat throughout the program if there's any time where we can be doing that. So to give a quick overview, so for today, we're going to mainly be talking about our project and the framework that we've created. So we'll be giving a brief overview. We're going to talk about some of the ways that it's been developed. So we're going to talk about both our intended deliverables of what we hoped to be able to deliver once we were starting this project. We're also going to talk about some of the limitations in the way that our project developed over the last year as well, and how it's kind of progressed over time. We're going to be talking about the purpose behind our framework of the pathways to engagement for engaging men on campus. And we're going to also discuss a little bit more about the consultation guide that we used in order to gain a lot of the information that we got from post-secondary institutions and practitioners at all of those institutions throughout the last year and a bit. So throughout the presentation, we'll be going more deeply into some of those topics. And Ian will be doing a lot of the deep diving for some of those areas. So to start off the presentation, one thing that we wanted to do was hear a little bit of information from yourselves. So one thing that I'm hoping everyone can do is open up the chat function in Teams, not the Q&A, but the chat. And what I'm going to do is ask a couple of questions. Oh, wow, I see the instructions are listed 111. It's 123, but what I'm hoping is everyone can open up the chat function in the presentation, and I'm going to ask a couple of questions, and I'm hoping that you can write out a response to that, and then on the count of 3, put down, like just kind of hit enter so that we can get a whole bunch of responses in the chat all at once. So the first question that I wanted to ask you is about programming that happens on your campuses to engage men. So when we were starting this project, we were looking at a lot of programming opportunities or ways that will engage men throughout post-secondary institution campuses. One of the ways that we defined that a little bit more was looking at programming or opportunities that specifically look to engage men as or male identified people as one of the primary groups. So it wouldn't necessarily be something like consent training where maybe you're hoping to get everyone in the university population to attend, but looking at those targeted groups of what programming happens on your campus that is specific towards male identified people. So the first question that I'm hoping you can answer in the chat is, to your knowledge, does your institution offer programming tailored towards male identifying individuals? So if you can type your answer into the chat there and hit send in 1, 2, 3. All right, so we're seeing a fair bit of no's, a couple yeses here and there's. Yeses for sports teams. Yes, we try. Some are unknown, totally fair. We're getting no, but some have tried. Awesome. So yeah, that's something that we're going to be talking a little bit about throughout the presentation as well. So when we had originally embarked on this project, one of the things that we were hoping to find out was we were originally looking for best practices we wanted to kind of talk with a bunch of PSIs from throughout Canada and find best practices on some of the ways that we can look to engage men on our campus through programming opportunities. And we were hoping to really lean on some of the great work that's already being done throughout the country. In our consultation, as we'll get to in a little bit, one of the things that we found was a lot of the programming opportunities that have been happening at PSIs aren't necessarily tailored specifically towards male identifying individuals. So when we started to find that out, we had to look at the information that we were getting, and instead of looking at best practices, we decided to look at promising practices and some of the information that we could pull in order to make a successful framework for everyone to build off of on their campuses. So the next question that I wanted to ask you all was, what challenges have you faced in having male identified individuals attend programming on your campuses? So if you can kind of put that in the chat there and click send in 1, 2, 3. Recruitment and interest. Let's see. Lack of engagement in general, accessibility. Men don't think they're the problem. What else do we have here? Men don't want to be the ones that attend, general commitments, having no attendance in general, absolutely. Hard to get them to come, interest. Yeah, so what we're seeing there is again, similar to what we were seeing in some of the consultations that we had done. When we were speaking to a lot of PSIs, one of the things that we were hearing was sometimes it's hard to get people to those programs in the first place. So there was a lot of institutions looking for guidance in a lot of ways of how can we actually get people to the programs. What are the best ways to structure them so that the commitment isn't too much, but so that it's still a very valuable learning opportunity for people where they're able to engage in a lot of content. So those are all very much things that had come out in our environmental scan and when we were doing some consultation with PSIs as well. So we'll definitely loop back to some of those things as we get towards the question period, and hopefully we'll be able to touch on some of those pieces throughout the presentation as Ian and I go through as well. So thank you very much for sharing. So the next thing that we wanted to share with you is a little bit about our project timeline and some of the work that we were able to do throughout. So for our project, I kind of broke up our timeline into three main chunks here. So from March to April was when we originally started doing a lot of this work. That's when our team started to get together originally and start to really think about what we wanted this project to be and what we wanted to try and accomplish throughout our time together. So during that time, we were kind of in that project ideation phase, trying to dream up like what we wanted this project to be. And during that time, we recognized that we really wanted a big part of the project to be consulting with other PSIs throughout the country to find out what some individuals are doing on their campuses. So one of the big pieces that we had done through that stage of the project was looking to create or refine a consultation guide that we would be able to use so that our team would be able to kind of go out and do consultation interviews with people at various institutions to find out more about some of the programming that's happening on their campuses. The next stage of the project was from April to July. So that was when we had already had our consultation guide up and running, and we were primarily going out and doing some of those interviews with people and gathering more information, doing our literature review. So throughout that time period, we were connecting with a lot of different institutions throughout Canada. We were kind of performing those interviews to learn more about some of the programming opportunities that are happening on our campuses, and really taking some in-depth notes about some of the struggles that people have faced, some of the successes that people have had, and anything of note that they really had to share. During that time, we also conducted a literature review to try and find out more information about if there is any prominent literature about how people went about engaging men or male identified individuals in gender-based violence work at post-secondary institutions. So we did a pretty thorough research and literature review throughout North America of some of the promising programs that have been coming up throughout the country and throughout the States. And that helped to inform some of the framework that we had put together as well. And then through August to October, kind of that last stage there was when we were doing a lot of the writing of our framework. So after we had done all of those consultations, we came together with all of the information that we had gathered, and we started to look for key themes and different things that we were seeing from each institution so that we were able to pull together what some of the needs would be in our framework that we want to address, and trying to address that through any promising practices that we were seeing or any literature that was prominent in the field. So throughout that time, we were able to engage 32 different institutions or individuals to consult throughout the country. Throughout that, we were engaging people from 7 different provinces or territories. So we hit a large chunk of the country, which was amazing. And we were able to get a lot of large institutions, a lot of small institutions, a mix of colleges and universities to really have a wide array of individuals and experiences that we were talking to, so that we could make sure that our framework was as comprehensive as possible, but also as versatile as possible, so that it was able to kind of move from one institution to the next and be a little bit more seamless, no matter if you're a large institution or a smaller institution. So that was a big part of some of our hope there. I'll pass things off to Ian.
All right. Good afternoon, everyone. Greetings from Hamilton. It's lovely to be here. It's lovely to share our work with you. I want to, as I start talking, I just want to acknowledge my colleagues that I've worked with over the last 14 months, who really have become part of, part of my family. They've really, and I just think it's, in this very public forum, I will say thank you to all of you. You have been wonderful to work with. So let's talk a little bit about our intended deliverables, and a shameless Schitt's Creek plug. We really set out, when we sat down and we began to get to know each other, talked about this notion of best practices. And we had set out really to see if we could discern what best practices would be. We felt that the field might benefit from being able to pick up something that said best practices and then implement it across the country at various institutions. The reality was that as we started speaking to these, having our consultations across the country, we realized that many of the PSIs and the individuals we spoke with didn't have specific programming that targeted male-identified individuals. So it really became challenging to see this as a project that was going to deliver best practices. But we wanted to make something that was quite useful. So we've stayed away from the terminology of best practices, and we've built a framework around things that are going to be promising in nature, things that can be guiding in nature. And we think that we've delivered something for folks, regardless of your institution and your institutional size, that you can pick up, and you have many places that you can start and do sort of a development phase. So we really hope that this is helpful for you. Next slide, Daniel, thank you. This is the purpose that we set out. So at the end of the day, when we decided on our program, or our project that we were going to do, we felt what we wanted to do was create a framework for understanding the institutional and program level considerations to engage men in the task of preventing sexualized and gender-based violence at post-secondary campuses. And so this really set the tone in terms of, we really wanted to deliver something that allowed people to pick it up and really personalize or customize the response or the programs or the tool that you might develop for your particular post-secondary institution. As Daniel has mentioned earlier, we came up with a consultation guide, and it was a team effort, and there was lots of questions that were sort of, we benefited from some previous knowledge and some previous work that one of our colleagues had done. I want to share some of the kinds of questions we asked so that you get a flavor of the conversations we were having. One of the things that many of you will be familiar with, I mean, we were obviously doing this in the middle of COVID. And what was really interesting about the consultation process is that people really were prepared to pick up the phone or get on a Zoom call or one of those virtual pieces and really have these conversations with us. People were open to talking to us about what they were doing, what they weren't doing, what the challenges were, and what was working, what was not. So some of the questions we talked about were, can you tell us about the initiatives or programs that you or your group or unit have offered? We asked them about the kinds of formats that they've had. So did you do campaigns, a one-time workshop? Did you do a training series? Did you do something that was immersive, like a semi-structured piece? And what of those did you feel were valuable? So we had some real variety around that. What types of programs did you offer? What kind of assessment have you done? How did you know your program worked? Do you have any recommendations on how to best measure outcomes and success? What has been the role of the senior administration in supporting the engagement of men on campus? Has there been funding and staffing provided for these projects? And what, in general, has institutional support looked like? So we really wanted to get a sense, and there's many more. There's 13 questions that we went through. We asked about male-identified faculty and male-identified staff and how involved they were or not involved. And what would positive engagement look like? So we spent a lot of time, and in amongst all that, I would say that those folks who acted as consultations to our project were generous with their time. These 13 questions are, we could be at this for hours, and they were very generous. Folks emailed after the fact and sent in extra work. They really connected with this idea that we were trying to put something together to help PSIs across the country. So Daniel talked a little bit about what we did in terms of our approach. I want to sort of slide into this notion of the environmental scan and what we were doing. The environmental scan was really useful because what we found were what people were doing across Canada. So we didn't come up with, like, as I said earlier, we didn't come up with best practices. Rather, we came up with a notion of here's what's happening across the country, and then our job really became to distill it down into a set of core considerations that PSIs might consider. And what we've done is we've actually structured this so that any PSI could pick up this tool and say, well, we don't have anything, so what would our pre-programming stages look like? We can move all the way through programming and all the way through to evaluation. And so it's a really useful tool in that sense. It really begins to have enable people, PSIs, the opportunity to sort of begin the work of engaging men and male identified individuals around sexual violence and gender-based violence, but doing it in a way that's thoughtful, that's PSI specific, and really tailored to the context within which it's going to be delivered. So from our environmental scan, we had some themes that we put forward in our document, and I want to talk a little bit about them because they do lend themselves then to our key considerations. When we asked about the kinds of programming that was happening on campuses or across the country, we really found a general diversity of programming. We found everything from one-off events to these deep structures, student-led events, things like welcome week events, those sorts of things. And we heard about bystander training, and we also heard about several partnerships that married sort of institutions with off-campus experts, and we thought that was really important to include in our work as well. We heard about varying levels of engagement with men and male identified folks on and off campus, everything from male and male identified driven events to complete backlash. Some consultations that we had talked about, absolute backlash in terms of trying to do this work. And so there's some real challenges that were identified in terms of the kinds of work we were hearing about. We also heard about the importance of male students, male faculty, male identified senior leadership as being really important in moving this kind of work forward on campus. Many of our consultations discussed this notion of mandatory versus voluntary programming. It was an interesting conversation to be had, and simply put, generally the notion of making these programs voluntary. The mandatory really doesn't have the long-term traction that there needs to be buy-in from the very front end, and that this notion of voluntary programming can be beneficial over the long period of time at a PSI. Noting also how the notion of dedicated resources is also important, and that many institutions see that they're not adequately funded. There's a lack of see, this is why I love Zoom. It's just live. This notion of dedicated resources, building support groups, really important to any sort of success. One of the things we heard, and it's not on this slide, but it's worth noting at this point, is just the sheer absence of any sort of evaluation or assessment that occurred in any sort of programming. It is something that every one of the individuals we had a consultation with acknowledged as important. It is also, by and far, one of the things that was not completed. And so certainly we make some strong considerations in our work as well around this.
All right, so in looking at what we've actually went on to include in this framework, so our framework, the tool in general is about 45 to 50 pages long. So we tried to make it as comprehensive and as useful as possible so that people can really pick this up and use it as a tool, whether you are looking to tweak some things that you're doing at your institution and make tailored edits where possible, or like Ian said, if you currently have nothing made and you need something to pick up so that you can start to build a program from scratch. We're hoping that this tool is really versatile in that way, where people can flip through to different sections or pick it up and read it from start to finish in order to help build out a comprehensive program. So in terms of what's included in this framework is we have first an introductory section where We talk a little bit about the project that we're hoping to embark on and what we're hoping to do with the tool. After that, we go into the environmental scan that Ian was just talking about and some of the pieces there that we learned from engaging with people throughout the process. In terms of sections that we have to help build out some of these programs more largely, we start with the pre-programming section that really starts from scratch of if you don't have anything done, like what are the first things that you need to consider in order to start building things out. Then we talk about programming more largely and some of the pieces that you'll need in order to be able to run the program. So some key considerations that you can make there in terms of staffing and some of those important pieces. We also talk about program evaluation, assessment, and review. This is a big part that we focused on a lot throughout the toolkit of just making sure that that assessment and evaluation piece is really worked in throughout the entire process, since we noted that it was something that wasn't seen too much through a lot of the programs that currently exist. And then the last few sections there, we have our references that we've used to create the tool, as well as recommended readings. So our recommended reading list is quite long, and it's a bunch of readings that our group had talked about extensively throughout the last year and a bit, and that we found were really formative in doing some work and things that could be helpful to other people to pick up and gain a little bit more context as to how they could help to frame things within their own institutions. Lastly, we have our appendices. This is a section where we thought we would be able to try and give people some resources that we used as well through the process. So our consultation guide is included in our appendices.
Hey, Daniel, can you hear me? You're kind of coming in and out a little bit.
Oh.
Your sound is tricky for folks to understand.
I'll scoot forward and hopefully that helps. But yeah, we also have our appendices, which has a bunch of different resources that we had used throughout the project to hopefully help other PSIs be able to pick up some pieces and do some of that consultation on their own campuses if they would like to as well. So that's where you'll see our consultation guide as well as some project plans and things like that too. Moving forward to key considerations. So like Ian was mentioning, throughout our entire project, we have a bunch of key considerations listed. Throughout each individual section, we have various key considerations that we thought would be important for PSIs to know while trying to engage men on campus in some of the programming initiatives that they're doing. So throughout the entire document, we have 40 key considerations split up throughout some of these sections. So you'll be able to see some of those as we go through. So we've pulled a few different key considerations that we wanted to just highlight so that people would have an understanding of what some of these are. But in our actual framework, we have the key consideration as well as a breakdown of a little bit more information about that specific topic. So one of the things that we talk about is longer term programming versus one-off programming and some of the benefits that you can gain from having like a more extensive campaign of programming that's built out instead of one-off smaller events and looking at some of the impacts that those can have. We talk about progressively tailored GBV content versus generic messaging and some of the impacts that that can have when we're specifically tailoring content towards different groups. Providing academic or co-curricular credit as well as a key consideration for people to help help individuals engage in some of this content throughout their PSIs, which was noted in the chat as well of having a lack of engagement as well. So looking at different ways that we can build in structures to our university to hopefully encourage people to engage in these conversations a little bit more as well through gaining academic or co-curricular credit. We talk a lot about taking a trauma-informed approach, and that's something that we've tried to build in throughout our entire framework so that that's kind of consistent throughout so that all of the programs that people would be building have that trauma-informed lens that are associated with it. We talk about bystander consent, healthy, relationship-focused, and really being intentional about the intersections that that can have with being able to practice positive behavior. As well as some of the other things that are noted here of responsible alcohol use, positive versus negative messaging. So in looking at some of the ways that we engage the programs, this was something that was mentioned earlier in the chat too of sometimes the programming that happened on campus, sometimes men can feel a little bit attacked and they don't want to engage in some of that programming. So how can we look to flip that narrative a little bit to encourage people to, be a positive change within the campus? So by engaging in this content, you'll be able to like rewrite the script and hopefully be a little bit of a more positive force to ending gender-based violence on your campus. And then we also touch on on-campus resources and policies. So that's just a quick snapshot of some of the things that we touch on throughout our framework, but there is a number of more key considerations and specific breakdowns about how that can be impactful throughout your work.
Okay, so we want to sort of, as we head towards wrapping up our PowerPoint and our time with you, talk about some of the big key themes that we found and some of the things that we want you to walk away from this presentation considering as being important in building programs, in maintaining programs, in creating an environment where male identified individuals feel connected to the idea of preventing gender-based violence. So one of the ones that came out loud and clear, both in the literature and from a consultation point of view, and that we support, is this notion that senior staff really have to take a leadership approach to this, really including in the development and implementation of policy at the PSI level to ensure longevity, right? So we need also are advocating for this notion of consistent and adequate funding for staffing and programming, such that one-off events often come from very small pots of money. Longer term funding ensures that we're actually building structures and programming into the PSI culture, which is really important. We think there's a real value in the notion of building grassroots student-oriented programming, and that we've heard from, and we believe that there's natural cohorts that exist at the PSI level, such as sports teams, residence groups, fraternities, clubs, and faculties that could be leaders in this work. We've heard about a number of different student-led programs that were developed at the grassroots, and we think that there's real merit in considering that. There's a real merit in considering the importance of those student-oriented and student-led programs being supported by senior staff as well. In other key themes that have come out of this project that you need to consider is senior leadership and commitment to training staff and faculty. Not only we have here receiving disclosures, but also knowing the pathways to ensuring safety. So it's not here, but and I'm going mildly off script, but from my other work at various places, we also need to understand the importance of faculty knowing what to do when they receive a disclosure and where that should go or who they should talk to. So it's really important to have those be very clear. As someone who's at a PSI, teaching at a PSI, knowing what to do is important. Engaging the students throughout the life of the program, all the way from this notion of pre-programming or needs assessment through the development piece, and then through facilitation, really begins to have them engage in the work that's happening, and really to begin a deep dive and an open conversation with respect to working towards ending toxic masculine culture at PSIs. And finally, this notion, and we've come back to this a couple of times, but ongoing evaluation, I don't think we can emphasize it enough, the importance to conduct evaluations, assessments are related to programming. So much about the budgetary process that occurs at PSIs relates to how effective or how efficient things run. Working on engaging men or male identified folks is no different. People are going to want to know that it's making a difference. So putting that as part of the early pieces of putting something together is really important, including using social media, using media, finding creative ways to do assessment and evaluation is also important. And so we think that that's part of what everyone should consider in terms of preparing this work. These are shameless dogs that are cute, which transition us to Q&A and any kind of conversation that you'd like to have with us. Thank you so much for having us. This has been great to finally share this work. It feels like we've been coming for a long time. So we're really happy to share and take questions, or even to hear your experiences and what lands with you. That would be probably where we'd like to go now. We have a bit of time left.
I have one question already up in the Q&A box, Ian and Dan. So this question from an anonymous attendee is regarding Ian's comments on senior leadership needing to know how to handle a disclosure. Were we speaking of a disclosure of experiencing harm or a disclosure of committing harm?
That's a great question. We're talking about, for the most part, I believe we're talking about experiencing harm. In my experience, I'm at Laurier. We have there's a whole sheet and pathway of what faculty are to do when they receive disclosures like that. I've received the other piece as well, and it's not necessarily as clear for me what I'm supposed to do related to committing harm. So there's a question in the chat from Alicia Fisher. Alicia says, thanks so much to us. I'm trying to imagine what longer programming could look like. Is 8 sessions considered a long time? How do you combat strains on commitment? So in a truly Zoom fashion, we will put that out to others because I'd love to hear what others think in terms of, and not necessarily panelists, but others who are in the room with us who have experience.
I think Ian, I can't hear Ian anymore, so I don't know if I'm the only one.
I think he froze, Leah,
Yeah.
Yeah, I wasn't sure if it was me or Ian. So you probably saw a mild panic on my face.
We have a lot of, sorry, you go ahead, Leah.
I think in terms of the question, we were thinking, say, like a semester long program has been posed by some people as a good approach. So once a week for the term. So a term is usually about 13 weeks, take off holidays and whatnot. So maybe, yeah, anywhere from 8 to 10, maybe 12 sessions. This has been done very successfully at some universities in the US, and it does tend to lead to the development of a strong peer support network within the cohort of participants, which can be really positive. It does tend to lead to deeper learning and behavioral change. So where possible, it's a good approach, especially if you can provide strong incentives for people to participate. So.
Just to jump in quickly, everything Lee and Ian were saying is absolutely right. I deal with students who are incredibly overburdened in terms of their time commitments, and one of the things that I think is a possible here is to reach out to your faculty to see if there are ways that they can incorporate. I mean, this is not necessarily. It'd be harder to focus specifically on engaging men, but trying to get them involved in putting things into courses, maybe giving more academic or co-curricular credit, as we've talked before, to provide those opportunities so that they're not adding this on top to an already full schedule. I have a lot of questions in the Q&A. If people don't mind my just reading out the first one, unless Daniel has something to, or Eric has, or Leah has something to offer there more on that question.
Yeah, the only other thing I was going to add to that, Sharon, before we maybe move on is,
sure.
I think the question of like strain is a good point too, right? Where depending on your institution size or your department size that's maybe taking on a program like that, 8 sessions can be a lot, right? Like 8 sessions is pretty time consuming as it is. So I think too, a big part of our framework also talks about like, who else can we engage? Like Sharon was just sharing, maybe that's something where, you know, this could be a program that works towards co-curricular credit or an academic credit. But even looking at like, are there other stakeholders on your campus that you can engage to be a part of those groups or those sessions? Where you're able to share some of that planning and commitment as well, so that it's not too much of a strain on the individual facilitating it, but then also looking at student time commitment as well to looking at maybe the length of the sessions to make sure that it's not too overburdensome. And I think if you're taking into consideration some of Leah's comments of, you know, removing meetings during holiday weeks and things like that, that can definitely help to remove that added pressure of attending this, but also needing to study for midterms and finals and things like that.
All right, so if no one else from the group has anything to add on that, oh, Leah is actually typing an answer to one of our questions, but thank you, Leah. One of the first questions was about organizing efforts of this type in terms of engaging men, and perhaps also referring to longer term efforts, perhaps, I'm not sure, at a very small college where men may feel more signaled out. I think Leah's provided some answer in the box, and we do have tips on that in the framework. I don't, in my case, I do face that challenge, and one of the ways that I think can help is to get yourself some opinion, get yourself involved and build relationships with opinion leaders and males that are going to attract more men to that program in a positive way that doesn't make it feel like make them feel singled out. So that would be my contribution, and I don't know if other people have.
I mean, that's a great question. I think a smaller college, there's some advantages to that. The ability to actually gather folks, keeping a positive framework, positive messaging, positive ideology around that. Men as role models is really important. Men as leaders on campus is really important. Male identified folks as leaders on campus is really important. I would be a little bit envious because I think the work of doing something like this at a much larger institution might be quite daunting. You may actually have greater connectivity to other campus supports in a smaller college. So yeah, and we do look, there are tips in the framework around that. So.
We have another question on the idea of whether there's a need for discipline-specific programming. So this individual is on the STEM side of campus, and I'm thinking about the frosh engineering culture and the exclusionary behaviors in computer science and chemistry.
I can make an attempt at answering that, if that works for my colleague.
Yeah,
my lovely colleagues. So we didn't find anybody doing that specifically, but I absolutely think that in terms of doing the tailored piece, that would be kind of the next level approach. Ideally, all the different faculties are going to be incorporating some of this kind of education into their departmental or faculty-wide curriculum, but I believe that most find that there's a real resistance to that sort of thing. But we do talk a lot in the framework about trying to get leaders across campus. So, high status male professors who have a lot of clout, or particularly charismatic male coaches or whatnot. So we do look at how there's a real opportunity that that isn't always tapped in the way that it could be to do this work and tailor it, but we didn't hear anybody sort of doing, I'm not being very articulate right now, but yeah, we didn't find anybody doing faculty specific work, except for in the case of athletics would be the exception.
I don't know if anybody has any other comments, but one of the next questions is whether or not there's a project or initiative that stands out to us from our review. I don't know if there's someone specifically who wants to take that one.
One thing I'll just jump in and say real quick is that because not a lot of folks were doing any assessment or evaluation, it's hard to speak to effectiveness. Certainly the literature suggests that the more long-term or say intensive the programming, the more likely it is to lead to behavioral change. But that is why the framework is quite, we have a very substantive section on evaluation to try to, moving forward to come up with best practices and really lift up some programs that are doing it really, really well.
There's also a question in the Q&A around pre-pandemic, post-pandemic, and what does this look like? And I don't know if you want to do that one next, Sharon.
There we see a lot of the literature review and previous work being done likely focuses on pre-pandemic context. Any thoughts about what engaging men looks like now in the pandemic context? Sports, residence life, in-person workshops are all not happening in the same way, so many opportunities for engagement are impacted.
Does that?
Well, I'm going to say that I think there's some significant challenges, and I don't know that it's happening like it would have happened in person. And I think there's been other priorities. So I think wellness. I can speak to one of the PSIs that I work at. The wellness center is really, working to support students, and these are the kinds of things that fall off the priority list during these times. So we talked about this as a cohort, as a group of folks, about like, what do we do with the pandemic piece? And our framework is fairly mute. I think we're optimistic that we'll get back to life pre-pandemic, but there wasn't anything happening. Like, no one was doing anything when we were actually doing consultations. So no one had really started to anticipate what it was going to look like. So, but I think it's really important to consider, like, what's this going to look like, if we don't, if people don't go back to class in the fall. I'm hoping they do.
One thing I can share to that as well, and this is maybe specific to my current institution. I'm not sure if this reads the same for a lot of other institutions, but during the early pandemic, when we had a lot of students not necessarily working and at home, my institution saw a lot of uptick in programming or learning opportunities on campus that are offered through like our open education sections or through our wellness education. So typically we were seeing a lot more people attending, participating, and engaging in some of the programs that we offer that are certificate-based or co-curricular credit-based, because there was a lot of students who were at home and not really out in their communities as much. So they were trying to continue to do some learning from home and to continue to educate themselves and also build their resume, which is, I think, a big part of that, the co-curricular credit piece, where I think that could potentially be low-hanging fruit. If we do have some programming at your certain institutions where you are able to move to a co-curricular credit space and really advertise that. I know that specifically at my own institution, we've seen a pretty big uptick in the number of students who are engaging in some of those things now, which has actually been a bit of an opportunity for our institution.
I'm not sure whether we have time for one more question or not. But if we do, I know that Lisa has typed an answer to the question. Oh, so it's actually gone. So how about men as leaders on campus is really important, yes, but part of the issue is that men are already overwhelmingly in leadership positions and seen as leaders on campus. Women and other genders are not. How do we encourage men to accept women's and trans leadership? Great question.
So I'd love to have my colleagues answer, but I do think that perhaps I wasn't as articulate as I needed to be earlier on. And I wanted to say that, what we're hearing is that young men in particular, if we're focused on a student population, want to see male leaders engaging in sort of the quote unquote healthy masculinity that, you know, that will exemplify, you know, how to, you know, navigate the world in a good way. So I don't think we're talking about here lifting up men to fill these positions in the way that in a toxic way. It's more looking at men who are engaging in this really kind of healthy masculinity that that some of the education is trying to get across.
If you don't mind me jumping in really fast.
Yeah.
I have a different perspective coming, not a different perspective, but I have a unique idea on this coming from a military university primarily, with our undergraduates all being military members. And as we all know what's going on right now in that environment, and our demographic is basically the opposite from every other post-secondary where you have a majority female demographic in many programs. We have, if we're lucky, 20%. And one of the problems the military also has, although they seem to be quickly trying to switch gears, is having women in leadership positions. And I hope that that will change, but this quick putting of women in leadership positions doesn't do the work. I think we also have to have the uncomfortable conversations around culture. And if they don't get to that piece, then we're nowhere. But that's, sorry for that being a little too brief, but that's just my 2 cents right now from where I'm at. I think we're almost out of time. Would people like me to take another question, or are we good to go? I don't want to push. I think we may have gone through all the questions and typed answers for the rest, and people may need to go. So I guess I'll hand it over to CJ. Is that right?
I think we are at time. And I really want to say thank you to each and every one of you who are part of the community of practice for sharing your great work today with the larger community, and for those who attended, who asked such great questions. If there are any outstanding questions to be answered, we will follow up with more information. So, as I said, a big heartfelt thank you to the Engaging Men on Campus community of practicing for sharing your knowledge and your expertise with us today. I'm excited for your tool to be released as part of the Courage to Act project, and our tools will be released in August 2021. So we're a few months away from the grand finale. We are deeply appreciative of the discussion here today, and you've expanded our knowledge in such meaningful ways. As you can see, Karina from Drawing Change has been creating a beautiful illustration to represent the conversation that we've had today. The final graphic, along with the video recording and transcript, will be made available on our website in the coming days. If you're interested in learning more about this tool, or in learning more about the opportunity to pilot some of these tools at your post-secondary institution, please continue to follow the Courage to Act project. And you can sign up to piloting opportunities via the Courage to Act Knowledge Center in fall 2021. And don't forget that registration is open to sign up for all of the remaining sessions that are part of the National Skillshare series, running through to August 18th, 2021. This Skillshare series will continue to highlight the work being done across Canada to address gender-based violence on campus. In total, it will have showcased 15 tools and toolkits that are being developed by 150 plus project partners, including our community of practice members. You can sign up on the Courage to Act website to learn more. I also want to thank all of our attendees for joining us and sharing with us today. We appreciate and take inspiration from your commitment to addressing and preventing gender-based violence on campus. We're lucky to be able to work alongside each and every one of you. Thanks for joining us today. And kindly remember to please complete the evaluation form when it pops up in your inbox. Take care, everyone.